The sound of Judge Martinez flipping through my financial disclosure documents was the only noise in courtroom 3B. My ex-husband Derek sat 3 feet away, his smirk slowly melting off his face like ice cream on hot pavement. His $800 an hour attorney had gone from confident chest-puffing to frantically shuffling through papers, searching for something that would explain why his guaranteed victory was turning into a public humiliation. "Mrs. Foster," Judge Martinez said, looking up from the file with raised eyebrows, "these numbers are quite impressive." Derek's face went from smug satisfaction to the color of week-old milk. His lawyer, the infamous Richard Kellerman who'd promised to take me for everything, suddenly looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Comment justice below if you know what it feels like when someone underestimates you so badly, they end up destroying themselves. This one's for everyone who stayed quiet while their ex dug their own grave. My name is Amanda Foster, I'm 29 years old, and 18 months ago I thought Derek Foster was going to be my partner for life. Instead, he became the biggest mistake I'd ever made, and the motivation for the most successful business venture I'd ever launched. Our marriage had lasted exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that I was counting or anything. Derek had been charming during our courtship, successful in his job as a regional sales manager, and convincing in his promises about building a future together. The problems started 6 months after our wedding, when Derek's true personality emerged from behind the facade he'd maintained during our dating period. He was controlling, dismissive, and had a particularly nasty habit of undermining my career aspirations while expecting me to handle all domestic responsibilities. "Amanda, this freelance writing thing is cute, but when are you going to get a real job?" he'd say while I worked late into the night, building my client base and developing my skills. "We need steady income, not these little hobby projects that bring in pocket change." Hobby projects. My hobby projects were bringing in $3,000 per month in freelance income, which Derek was happy to spend on his golf memberships and expensive dinners out, but unwilling to acknowledge as legitimate work. The condescension got worse as my freelance business grew. Instead of celebrating my success, Derek seemed threatened by my increasing independence and financial contribution to our household. He'd interrupt my work calls, complain about my home office setup, and make sarcastic comments about my little computer time whenever I worked weekends or evenings. "You're spending too much time on the computer," he'd complain when I worked weekends to meet client deadlines. "Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, but you're more interested in your little writing projects than in being a wife." Being a wife, according to Derek, meant cooking his meals, doing his laundry, managing his social calendar, and being available whenever he wanted attention, while also contributing financially through my little writing projects. Derek had very specific ideas about what a successful marriage should look like, and they all revolved around traditional gender roles that positioned him as the breadwinner and decision-maker while I played a supporting role that was both financially productive and personally subservient. When I landed a major contract with a national retail chain that required extensive research and strategy development, Derek complained that I was obsessed with work and neglecting our relationship. But when the contract resulted in a $25,000 payment that allowed us to take a vacation to Europe, Derek was happy to enjoy the benefits while continuing to dismiss the work that had made it possible. "This is nice," Derek had said while we sat at a cafe in Paris, looking out over the Seine River. "It's good that your little writing projects can pay for trips like this." Little writing projects. Even while enjoying a vacation funded entirely by my business success, Derek couldn't bring himself to acknowledge my work as legitimate professional achievement. The pattern became more pronounced as my client base expanded. When I received contracts from Fortune 500 companies, Derek would ask why I was taking on so much extra work instead of focusing on our life together. When those contracts resulted in significant revenue increases, Derek would suggest expensive purchases or upgrades to our lifestyle without connecting the dots between my professional success and our improved financial situation. It was as if Derek had created 2 separate categories in his mind: his real job that deserved respect and recognition, and my computer hobby that occasionally generated useful income but wasn't worthy of serious consideration or support. The breaking point came during a dinner party with Derek's colleagues, when he introduced me as just my wife to a potential client who'd specifically asked to meet me because he'd heard about my marketing expertise. "Amanda doesn't really understand business," Derek had said with a dismissive laugh. "She writes blog posts and social media stuff. Nothing too complicated." Blog posts and social media stuff. I'd been managing comprehensive digital marketing strategies for 12 different clients, including 2 Fortune 500 companies. My blog posts had generated millions in revenue for businesses across 6 industries. But Derek reduced my professional expertise to nothing too complicated because acknowledging my success would threaten his position as the primary breadwinner. What made Derek's dismissal particularly infuriating was that he knew almost nothing about what I actually did for work. He'd never asked to see my client contracts, never inquired about my project deadlines, and never shown interest in understanding the strategic thinking behind my marketing campaigns. When clients called during dinner, Derek would roll his eyes and make exaggerated gestures about my important business calls. When I worked late to finish a project that would generate $15,000 in revenue, Derek would complain that I was ignoring our relationship for money. The irony was that Derek's lifestyle had improved significantly since my freelance business had taken off. His golf membership, his expensive whiskey collection, his weekend trips to visit college friends, all funded partially by the hobby income he constantly dismissed. But acknowledging my financial contributions would have required Derek to admit that his wife was succeeding professionally, and that admission would have threatened his carefully constructed narrative about being the successful spouse married to someone who played around with small business ideas. That night, I realized our marriage was built on Derek's need to feel superior rather than on mutual respect and partnership. He didn't want a successful wife, he wanted a convenient assistant who contributed financially while remaining subservient personally. The divorce papers were filed 6 weeks later. Derek's reaction was exactly what I'd expected: anger, accusations, and threats about taking me for everything in the settlement proceedings. "You think you can just walk away from this marriage?" Derek had screamed during one of our final conversations. "I supported your little business dreams, and now you owe me. My lawyer is going to make sure I get half of everything you've built." Half of everything I'd built. Derek genuinely believed that his financial support, which had consisted mainly of paying rent while I handled groceries, utilities, and household expenses, entitled him to ownership of the business I'd created through my own expertise and client relationships. What Derek didn't understand was that my little writing projects had evolved into something much more substantial during our final year of marriage. While he was focused on undermining my confidence and minimizing my achievements, I was quietly building Foster Digital Marketing into a legitimate business entity. The transformation had started when my largest client, a regional restaurant chain, asked me to handle their complete digital overhaul instead of just creating blog content. The project required developing a comprehensive online presence, implementing e-commerce capabilities, and creating marketing strategies that would increase revenue across 12 locations. The challenge was significant but exciting. I spent months researching industry best practices, studying consumer behavior patterns, and developing creative approaches to digital engagement that would differentiate the restaurant chain from their competitors. The results were extraordinary. Within 6 months, the restaurant chain's online orders increased by 340%, their social media engagement improved by 200%, and their overall revenue grew by $2.1 million annually. More importantly, the success led to referrals from other businesses who wanted similar transformations. Word of mouth in the business community was powerful. Restaurant owners talked to retail managers, who talked to healthcare administrators, who talked to financial services executives. Each successful project generated 2 or 3 referrals, creating a snowball effect that expanded my client base beyond anything I'd imagined possible. By the time Derek and I separated, Foster Digital Marketing was managing complete digital strategies for 18 clients, employing 2 part-time contractors, and generating revenue that exceeded Derek's sales manager salary by a significant margin. But I'd kept the business details private, partly because Derek had shown no genuine interest in my work, and partly because I'd learned that discussing my success only triggered more criticism and attempts to control my professional decisions. Derek's assumptions about my financial situation were based on our joint checking account, which showed the modest amounts I transferred for household expenses. He had no access to my business accounts, no knowledge of my client contracts, and no understanding of the revenue I was generating through Foster Digital Marketing. His lawyer, Richard Kellerman, had built his strategy on those same false assumptions. During our initial mediation sessions, Kellerman had painted me as a dependent spouse whose hobby income couldn't support independent living, making me reliant on Derek's financial support for basic survival. My client has been the primary breadwinner throughout this marriage, Kellerman had argued during our first court appearance. Mrs. Foster's freelance writing generates minimal income and cannot sustain her lifestyle without Mr. Foster's support. We're requesting alimony payments of $4,000 per month to maintain her standard of living. Alimony payments of $4,000 per month. Kellerman was asking Derek to pay me nearly twice what my business checking account showed in monthly deposits, because he'd assumed those deposits represented my total income rather than just the portion I allocated for personal expenses. Meanwhile, Derek was practically glowing with satisfaction. He'd convinced himself that our divorce would leave me financially devastated and dependent on his ongoing support. In his mind, the alimony payments would be proof of his superior earning power and evidence that I couldn't survive without his financial contributions. She's going to realize what she gave up, Derek had told his friend Mark loud enough for me to hear as we left the courthouse after our second hearing. $4,000 a month for the rest of her life, and she'll still be struggling to make ends meet with her little writing hobby. The arrogance was breathtaking. Derek genuinely believed that my business generated so little income that $4,000 monthly alimony would be a financial lifeline rather than pocket change. But Judge Martinez had requested complete financial disclosure from both parties before making any final decisions about asset division or support payments. That meant providing tax returns, bank statements, business records, and documentation of all income sources for the previous 3 years. Derek's disclosure was straightforward: his sales manager's salary, modest investment accounts, and the checking account we'd shared during our marriage. His total annual income was $87,000, which was respectable but not extraordinary. My disclosure was more complex. Foster Digital Marketing's business accounts showed $680,000 in revenue for the previous year alone. My personal income, after business expenses and contractor payments, was $420,000 annually. The business assets, including client contracts, intellectual property, and equipment, were valued at approximately $1.2 million. I was earning nearly 5 times Derek's salary, and my business was worth more than most people's houses. The morning of our final hearing, Derek arrived at the courthouse wearing his most expensive suit and a smile that suggested he was expecting a financial victory. Kellerman looked equally confident, carrying a briefcase full of arguments about why Derek deserved significant alimony and asset division based on his role as the primary financial provider during our marriage. "This is going to be easy," Derek whispered to Kellerman as we waited outside the courtroom. "She's got nothing without me. Nothing without him." Derek was about to learn exactly how wrong that assumption was. Judge Martinez called our case at 10:15 a.m. We took our seats at opposite tables, with Derek still wearing that confident smirk and Kellerman organizing his papers with the efficiency of someone who expected a routine victory. Before we proceed with arguments about asset division and support payments, Judge Martinez announced, "I'd like to review the financial disclosures submitted by both parties." She opened Derek's file first, scanning through documents that confirmed what everyone already knew: steady employment, modest savings, predictable income patterns that painted the picture of a middle-class professional with conventional financial habits. Then she opened my file. The silence stretched as Judge Martinez read through page after page of business records, tax returns, and financial statements that told a completely different story than what Derek and his lawyer had been expecting. Her eyebrows rose higher with each page. Corporate contracts worth 6 figures. Monthly revenue reports showing consistent growth over 3 years. Investment accounts that Derek had never known existed. Intellectual property valuations that exceeded his annual salary. Mrs. Foster, Judge Martinez said finally, looking up from the documents, these numbers are quite impressive. Foster Digital Marketing generated $680,000 in revenue last year? Yes, Your Honor, I replied calmly. The business has grown significantly over the past 3 years. Derek's smirk vanished completely. His mouth fell open slightly, and he turned to stare at me with an expression of complete shock and disbelief. This wasn't the financially dependent wife his lawyer had described in their legal filings. Kellerman's confident posture deflated like a punctured balloon. He was flipping frantically through his own papers, searching for some explanation that would reconcile his client's assumptions with the financial reality being revealed in open court. And your personal income after business expenses was $420,000? Judge Martinez continued, her tone suggesting she was as surprised as everyone else in the courtroom. That's correct, Your Honor. After paying contractors, business expenses, and tax obligations, my personal income from Foster Digital Marketing was approximately $420,000 last year. The mathematical reality was sinking in around the courtroom. Derek, who'd been expecting to receive alimony based on my alleged financial dependence, was learning that his wife earned nearly 5 times his salary and had built a business worth more than $1 million. Mr. Kellerman, Judge Martinez said, turning to Derek's attorney with barely concealed amusement, you've requested $4,000 monthly alimony payments based on your client's status as the primary breadwinner. How do you reconcile that request with Mrs. Foster's demonstrated income? Kellerman looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His entire legal strategy had been based on financial information that was completely incorrect. He shuffled through his papers desperately, searching for some argument that would make sense given the new information. Your Honor, we were not aware of the extent of Mrs. Foster's business success, Kellerman stammered. Our calculations were based on the income information available to us during the marriage. The income information available to you, Judge Martinez repeated with a tone that suggested she found this explanation inadequate. Are you saying Mr. Foster was unaware of his wife's business earnings? Derek's face went from pale to bright red. He was being forced to admit, in open court, that he'd been so dismissive of my work that he'd never bothered to understand or track my actual business success. I knew she was writing for some companies, Derek said weakly. I didn't realize. I mean, she never told me it was that much money. She never told you, Judge Martinez said with a tone that suggested she found Derek's ignorance remarkable rather than excusable. Mr. Foster, were you not curious about your wife's income, especially given that you're now requesting alimony based on claims of superior earning power? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Derek had no good answer because there was no good answer. He'd been so focused on minimizing my achievements that he'd remained willfully ignorant about my actual financial success. Your Honor, my attorney Sarachin interjected, Mrs. Foster maintained separate business accounts and handled her own professional finances. Mr. Foster chose not to involve himself in understanding or supporting his wife's career development. Chose not to involve himself. The phrase captured Derek's dismissive attitude perfectly and highlighted his responsibility for his own ignorance about my business success. Mrs. Foster, Judge Martinez said, given your substantial income and business assets, are you requesting any support or asset division from your husband? No, Your Honor, I replied. I'm requesting only the return of my personal property and the dissolution of our marriage. I don't need or want any financial support from Mr. Foster. The irony was complete. Derek had come to court expecting to receive thousands of dollars monthly in alimony from a wife he'd assumed was financially dependent. Instead, he was learning that his dependent wife was a successful entrepreneur who wanted nothing from him except a divorce. Mr. Kellerman, Judge Martinez continued, are you still pursuing alimony payments from Mrs. Foster? Kellerman looked at Derek, then at the financial documents, then back at Judge Martinez with the expression of someone who'd just realized his entire case had collapsed in the most public way possible. No, Your Honor, Kellerman said quietly. We're withdrawing our request for spousal support. Very well, Judge Martinez said. Given the financial disclosures presented today, I'm granting the divorce as requested by Mrs. Foster. No alimony will be awarded to either party. Mr. Foster, you'll be responsible for your own legal fees. The gavel came down with a sound that felt like freedom. Derek sat motionless, staring at the table in front of him with the expression of someone who'd just realized he'd played himself. His confident smirk had been replaced by the dawning understanding that he'd underestimated his wife so completely that he'd destroyed his own legal strategy. As we left the courtroom, Derek finally found his voice. Amanda, I had no idea your business was. I mean, why didn't you tell me you were making that much money? I tried to tell you about my work, I replied. You called it hobby projects and nothing too complicated. You were more interested in diminishing my achievements than understanding them. The lesson I learned wasn't about hiding success or managing other people's egos. It was about understanding that respect has to be genuine and unconditional, not based on someone's perception of your value or their ability to understand your contributions. What's your courtroom victory story? Drop a comment below if you've ever watched someone's assumptions about you completely backfire in the most spectacular way possible.